New York, 1,702. 500 people dead. 500 names erased from attendance rolls, from family dinner tables, from crowded streets. This AI reconstruction revisits a summer when yellow fever carved its mark into a city of barely 5,000 souls. Yellow fever. A disease that doesn't discriminate. Or does it? The data referenced in this video can be verified through authoritative historical sources, such as the 18th century medical document collection at the U.S. National Library of Medicine, as well as epidemiological archives at local historical museums from the colonial period. Because there was something strange about that number. When the epidemic swept through, it didn't spread evenly across the map. It didn't distribute equally among neighborhoods. And that makes people ask, is death truly fair, or does it also discriminate between rich and poor, crowded and spacious, clean and dirty? Before seeking the answer to that question, let's return to New York in 1702, a small port city in the coastal region of Eastern America. The population at that time was only about 5,000 people, but enough to become an important goods transit point where ships from the Caribbean docked, bringing sugar, tobacco, rum, and something no one could see: the yellow fever virus hidden in the blood of Aedes aegypti mosquitoes. July. Summer heat like burning. Stagnant water everywhere. Mosquitoes breeding uncontrollably. Then the first case appeared. A shoemaker. Fever so high his skin burned. Eyes yellow as turmeric. Vomiting thick black blood. Dead after 3 days. People thought it was heat stroke. But a week later, 5 more people had similar symptoms. 2 weeks later, 20 people. A month later, the entire neighborhood. 500 people dead. That number is equivalent to a city of 50,000 today losing 5,000 people in just one summer. Imagine, every 10 people you know, one person disappears. Every 10 neighboring families, one family with no one left to open the door. This video is built using AI technology, aimed at recreating and illustrating a part of history from a visual perspective. But here's what they didn't record in the books. The epidemic didn't spread evenly. The wooden houses along the docks, where dock workers, sailors, immigrant families lived crammed together, fell silent first. The narrow alleys where sunlight only got through at noon, where damp air reeked of mold and rotten water. The communal wells clogged with mud, murky water. The wooden barrels collecting rainwater left uncovered. The perfect place for mosquitoes to lay eggs. In contrast, the northern neighborhood, where wealthy merchants lived in 2-story brick houses with gardens, still heard the sound of children laughing. It wasn't that they were immune, just that the mortality rate was much lower. Too much to call it coincidence. Was it because the houses were spacious, with air circulation? Or because they had private wells, not needing to share dirty water sources with 20 other families? Or simply, they could flee. Get on horses, leave the city, hide in distant farms until the epidemic passed. But the poor couldn't run. They had nowhere to run. Their work was tied to the docks. If they didn't work, no money for rent, no food for their children, they stayed, and they died. A small detail in the medical records of that time, few people noticed. There were families that lost 3 generations in just 2 weeks. Grandfather, father, son. 3 coffins buried on the same day. The whole village came to the funeral, but had to stand far away, afraid of contagion. But then there were families, wealthy families, with only one person infected, carefully cared for, drinking expensive medicine, and surviving. Why? Medicine at that time didn't know about mosquitoes. They believed disease spread through poisonous air, miasma. They burned sulfur, scattered lime powder, even fired guns into the sky to drive away the toxic air. No one knew that Aedes mosquitoes liked to lay eggs in clean, stagnant water. Water in barrels. Water in basins. Water in shallow wells that no one changed. And those places were precisely the poor neighborhoods, where people didn't have enough clean water to change daily, where 10 people shared one bucket of water for 3 days. And the wealthy? They had servants who emptied water daily. They had deep wells, clear groundwater flowing. They had open space, fewer mosquitoes, less disease. They had money to buy pain medicine, had personal caregivers when sick. But no one talked about that. No one wrote that. The poor died more. Why? Because back then, death was seen as fate, as God's will, as punishment for invisible sins, not as a matter of sanitation, living space, or social inequality. And that's why the epidemic continued while no one changed anything. August. The peak. Every day there were 20, sometimes 30 deaths. The gravediggers couldn't bury fast enough. They had to hire more people, pay double wages. Coffins ran out. Carpenters couldn't keep up. People began burying bodies in wool blankets, in canvas tarps, even just covering them with banana leaves, then hastily covering with dirt. There's a letter, preserved in the historical museum, from a pastor sent back to his hometown. He wrote, "I no longer have the strength to pray for everyone. Every morning I wake up is hearing another name gone. They didn't die because of sin. They died because they lived in the wrong place. They died because they were born into families not lucky enough." Living in the wrong place. What did he mean? Did he mean that if born in a different neighborhood, a different family, a house slightly cleaner, with 5 more square feet of space, they would live? If that's true, then this was no longer a natural disaster. This was a selective disaster. This was death, predetermined by the zip code where you were born. In the worst days, there was a mother holding her 4-year-old daughter running all over the city looking for a doctor. But the doctors had fled since the week before. They had horses, had money, had places to go. And that mother? She stood in front of the only hospital, already closed. A wooden sign hung, full. Please return when the epidemic subsides. The child died that very night. The mother buried her child with her own hands. No pastor, no coffin. Only a small hole in the corner of the backyard of a leaky wooden house. This story isn't in textbooks. It only lies in the faded diary of a neighbor who witnessed and wrote it down. He wrote, "If she had been a little richer, the child might have lived. But who cares about poor children?" September. The epidemic began to subside, not because there was medicine, not because medicine found a cure, but because the weather changed seasons. Temperature dropped. Mosquitoes died gradually. The virus lost its host. Nature self-regulated, as if nothing had happened. 500 people dead, 500 families shattered, 500 names no one remembers anymore, except the faded lines in the parish register, hastily written, "Died of fever." But even when the epidemic ended, the question remained. Could they have survived if they lived somewhere else? If they had more space? If the water was cleaner? If they didn't have to cram 10 people in one room, 2 families sharing one outdoor toilet? And if the answer is yes, then they didn't die from the epidemic. They died from poverty. This is the truth people don't want to admit. Epidemics don't kill people fairly. They seek out the weakest places, the most vulnerable places. And in 1702 society, that place was precisely the poor neighborhoods. When the epidemic passed, the survivors in the wealthy neighborhood returned from the farms, repaired windows, swept the gardens, continued trading. Life returned to normal. They told stories about the terrible summer, as if it were just a fleeting nightmare. But in the dock area, there were houses where no one lived anymore. Doors locked and bolted. Inside, chairs still in their original positions. Bowls and chopsticks still on the table, perhaps from the last meal. Children's clothes hanging on the line, still not collected. Only there was no one left to sit and eat. No one left to wear those clothes anymore. A year later, those houses were resold cheaply. Other families moved in, and the cycle continued like that. More than 300 years later, in 2020, when the COVID-19 pandemic swept the world, researchers discovered something shocking. The poor still died more. The crowded residential areas, the cramped housing complexes, those without the ability to work remotely, without adequate health insurance, they were still the first to fall onto the death list. In New York, the mortality rate in the Bronx, where the poor concentrated, was double that of upscale Manhattan. In London, immigrants, manual workers, died more than the office class working from home. In Mumbai, the slums became the epidemic center. History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes terrifyingly. 300 years. And the lesson still hasn't been learned. Or more accurately, no one wants to learn it. So then, are epidemics truly fair? Or are they just a mirror, reflecting the injustice already present in society, exposing the cracks that everyone deliberately closes their eyes to ignore? In 1702, 500 people died. But perhaps, what's more frightening isn't the number, but the question. Among them, how many people could have survived if they had been born in the right place? If they had enough money to rent a house larger than 10 square feet? If they could flee when needed? And if the answer is more than we think, then this is no longer just a story about an epidemic. This is a story about who has the right to live and who doesn't. About how death can be predicted based on your home address. Death doesn't choose people, but living conditions do. And that's the most terrifying truth.